Okay. Hi, team. I don't have a tripod today, so my phone is rubber banded to a chair. Um, so if it's a little weird or if I don't see your comment, it's because the rubber band is hiding. I'm going to be carving this sauce spoon or small ladle. We'll see how it turns out. Either way, it's for sale at the Christmas tree farm, and I found that this shape is just a fun shape for me because it's challenging. This extra wide bit is very hard to do, and it's also just very appealing to everyone who sees it. So I'm going to be carving that. It's been a couple days since I've carved, but since I've started this apprenticeship challenge, where the very first thing I told people was make sure you're carving every day, I decided to take my own medicine and carve. I hadn't been carving because I have a deadline for both my book manuscript, which I have one more chapter to edit, and then also for a couple of the scientific manuscripts that I have a business editing that kind of boxed me in and made me feel like it would be unwise for me to spend any time doing that. But I also just needed a break from it today. So I guess often I am taking questions here, and I'm happy to do that, but I also wanted to, excuse me, just do some talking about why I think it's important to carve every day, and why that was the first bit of a challenge that I gave people as part of this apprenticeship challenge. So I guess the reason I feel like that's the very first thing is that it's easy when you have a goal of, I want to be a spoon carver, I want to make part of my living carving spoons. It's easy to fall off the bandwagon, right? Like, it's a lot easier to look at people's photos online of spoons they've carved and engage with that than it is to do the hard and frustrating work of carving your own stuff. And even if you get into that zone of like really being into carving, I think a lot of us have that tendency of being in that zone and then falling out of that zone, or getting excited about the next thing, or just letting it slide. And boy, it's hard not to talk about what I have planned for next week for this. But you know what I mean? Does anyone here, like me, feel like it's, you make a resolution of I'm going to carve every day, and then it falls off the bandwagon. And I think until you have like an economic push, as in orders that you've promised people you would do, that gets you off your butt and actually doing the thing that you really want to do every single day, even if it's something that you love doing. If you're like me, your life is full, you've got lots of other things going on, and it's easy to justify why you're going to put it off, even for just a day, and then that day turns into a week, and then it feels even harder to get back into it, and then you write a long blog post that's about why you fell off the bandwagon and how good it feels to get back on it, and the dirty little secret is that aside from leaving a helpful little comment here or there, nobody cares. Just nobody cares. We all think that everyone is paying attention to us, and everyone is too busy paying attention to themselves, which is as it should be. And so nobody's going to care if you stop carving spoons. The only one who's really going to be impacted is you, because you won't achieve the thing that you wanted to achieve. So that for me is why starting to carve, pushing yourself to carve every single day is the most important thing, because everything else flows from that decision. Your resolution falls through usually by the next day. Yeah, exactly. Any other comments as long as I'm here? Right. So a big part of the apprenticeship challenge was to see if I could push you guys to sort of hold to resolutions that you otherwise wouldn't hold to, because if I do care, if I do feel like if you do feel like I'm pushing you and expect you to do this thing that you said you would do, then maybe you would stick with it. The other reason I wanted to do the challenge is because in my apprenticeship with Dana, which isn't over by the way, but because I am in theory going to be at the farm every day until close to Christmas, it didn't make sense for Dano to continue during this time of the year. He'll pick back up in January. At any rate, doing this thing with Dano made me realize sort of how much all of the little side skills of what to do to support yourself in doing something as a business are not talked about, right? It's fairly easy to learn how to carve a spoon online. It's a lot harder and a lot less talked about how to create a business carving spoons. Let's see what else is going on. And I realize, I mean, I don't have the biggest business carving spoons, but I feel like I've learned a lot. And especially in the process of writing this book that's ostensibly about my farm, but really has quite a lot to do with my spoon carving business. I've found myself articulating a lot of things that I felt like, were helpful to Dano, I think, and would be helpful to you guys. And so I do worry that sometimes that some of you who signed up thought you were signing up for some sort of spoon carving class. I tried to be as upfront about that as possible. It's not a spoon carving class. I think I made that clear with the initial round of things. You know, there's a lot of information that I and others have put out online that if you have a question, a technical question of how you do a particular thing, that's great. And you can almost certainly find the answer if you're willing to put in the time doing the research. The stuff that doesn't really have answers out there yet is how to go about sort of assessing your situation and creating the framework that's going to allow you to squeak in the background as well. The framework that's going to allow you to take whatever steps might be the right steps for you. So, and these steps are things that part of why I think it's helpful to have someone else tell you to do them is, I know for me, they were scary, or they felt like not me, or they felt somehow philosophically opposed to what I was identified myself with. And it took years, in some instances, for me to sort of get over my scruples. Scruples isn't the right word, but get over my sense of, you know, that isn't me, and come around to the idea of, okay, I'm open to trying all of these different things to figure out what works, if that means that I can support my family doing the thing that I love. So if that sounds like you, then that's what this is really designed for. It's designed to be very self-directed, right? Like, there's no grades. I'm not looking over your shoulder. I'm mostly just, I'm especially because this is such a busy time of year for me. But I'm mostly just here to sort of give you the direction and a push, and then how much you actually run with it is really your thing. Because at the end of the day, this is going to sound harsh. At the end of the day, I don't really care. You know, if you pursue this and you become an amazing spoon carver who carves out this enormous business for yourself, you know, selling spoons and traveling around Africa selling spoons and some sort of cultural exchange, great. You know, more power to you. And if you don't, that's also fine too. And I'm going to do me, and you're going to do you. And I'm not keeping track, really, in part because there's no way I can keep track with 90 of you guys signed up for this thing. So it's very self-directed, and the other part of that is that sort of how much you push yourself really has to do with yourself, right? That I'm only going to sort of give you as a certain nudge, and that doesn't mean that you can't go further, and that doesn't mean that you can't, So for instance, I told people, if you have questions about how to carve spoons, go read my very first blog post ever. I laid out exactly how I carve spoons. Everything you're watching me doing here is written down in my first blog post with pictures. And then every little detail that's maybe not in there is at this point documented in Spoonosaurus, which if you don't know what Spoonosaurus is, well, I don't know how you found me without knowing what Spoonosaurus is. But if any of you guys watching aren't familiar with Spoonosaurus, it's another Instagram account that Matt White and I started a year ago that is just 1-minute videos with all the little tricks of the trade of the actual spoon carving tricks that we felt like weren't being captured anywhere else because they were so specific, so nerdy, so particular that very few people would actually be interested. But there's a lot of information there. I think there's maybe 70 videos, something like that. So an hour of watching those will give you a lot more information. Then there's my hours and hours of YouTube content, which quite frankly is just me carving like this, right? So there's only so much I think you can gain from watching hours and hours and hours of that. But if that's your thing, then it's probably a better use of your time if you're ambitious than watching whatever TV show you're watching. You think good advice to give people is to book a stall. Once they've booked a stall, they have to make the woodenware to sell in it. Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point. Having the event coming up is definitely a kick in the butt. I know I've found myself, like for instance, right now, I'm carving something because I know Christmas is coming and I have a Christmas tree farm and I know the sale is there. I know that if I carve this spoon, it will sell. Now, one of the reasons I wasn't carving for the last couple of days is because I felt like there were so many other things I needed to do with my time that it was actually a poor use of my time at this time of year to sit down and carve. That, I'm going to earn $25 from this hour, but given the deadlines I have today, and the work that I'm starting this week, it felt like if I couldn't be carving in the evening, and it felt like I didn't have time to carve this evening or yesterday evening or the evening before that I really just shouldn't be carving. But you're absolutely right that, giving yourself that looming thing that's happening and not, fear of really embarrassing yourself is a good way to go about it, for sure. Now, part of, I don't sell at events. I sell at my tree farm. I used to do maybe 2 other events per year, which were okay, but not great, small number of people. I've never tried to do like a big go down to a city to a craft fair kind of event, but I know people who do, and that makes sense for them. I do think the tricky thing with those sorts of events is that psychologically it's really hard to watch so many people walk by without paying any attention to you. I think I get spoiled by my tree farm, which is on this quiet dirt road that there's really no reason to drive down unless you're coming to my farm. And so when people show up, I know it's just a matter of how much money they're going to spend because they've driven all that way to buy something from me, rather than are they even going to stop? Are they going to talk? Are they even going to, because at an event, 90% of people walking by don't ever stop. And of those that do stop, 90% don't actually buy anything. So you're talking about 1% of the people who are walking by are maybe going to buy something. That's if your stuff is good, if your price is right. And we'll talk more about pricing in coming weeks because I figure I'll do one of these live things each week to support the apprenticeship. But I think that, one of the main reasons to sort of give yourself the kick in the pants to carve is that in order to stand out in something like spoon carving that's very sort of niche and weird, or something that is more general, at those two extremes, you have to be extremely good to either sort of make it clear why what you do is valuable on this extreme of the spoon carving, or to stand out from the crowd when it's something that's more generally accepted. So either way, becoming really, really good at what you do is the key to sort of being having the general public think that what you're doing is worth paying attention to. And it takes a long time to get really good. It's amazing how fast you can get good if you actually study something. And I'm not one of those who would say, oh, there's so many more resources today. It's easier to get good now than it used to be back when I was starting. There are many more resources, but I think that the common denominator is still how much time you're willing to spend doing it. And I do think that spending an hour a day just works out better than spending 7 hours on Saturday. Because it's not just about, just dug too deep there. It's not just about the sheer hours. It's about all of the thinking and processing that you do all week long as part of sort of continuing to grapple with things that show up each day in your hour that you're carving. So putting aside that time and really sacrificing for that time is the secret to success, and then just doing it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And if you look at anyone, you think, God, how'd they get so good? I guarantee you that's how it happened. Okay. Just gonna do just a little more here. So yeah, and I expect, let's say you're doing the apprenticeship challenge and you fall off the bandwagon and you fail to carve on a given day. Well, the most important thing you can do is just get back on the bandwagon and carve the next day. It's not rocket science, and it's not anything you wouldn't expect. It's very basic. It's just time with the knife. And it's time with the knife, and it's the discipline of doing it every day. I do think that the discipline of doing it every day, being able to sort of make that commitment to yourself and then stick with it, even if you're the sort of person that has a hard time holding commitments elsewhere in your life, being the sort of person who holds this commitment here at this point in your life with this thing will make you better, well, at all parts of your life, but will define sort of how well this thing works out. Because I do think it's one of those situations where, how you do this thing just has rollover effect to how you do all sorts of things in your life. Muscle memory develops better from short repetition, and also just the habit of making it a part of your life. I wrote a blog post a couple weeks ago about the habit of backing my truck into its parking spot at our house, which started really because there's a poorly placed telephone pole, and I nearly backed right into it numerous times. And finally, I said, I'm gonna do something different, or I'm gonna totally slam into this telephone pole at some point. So I started backing in, and then I heard this great thing on Freakonomics Radio, the podcast, that had to do with what they found for people who started backing into spaces, is that it was correlated with greater success later in life. And the theory is that it has to do with if sort of the habits that you develop, the same habit that gives you sort of the willingness to defer the gratification of pulling into the spot, translates into a willingness to defer gratification in other places in your life. And deferred gratification translates into more success in life, because a lot of times, well, much of the time, the hard stuff is hard. The stuff that's worth getting is hard and takes a lot of time, and you have to put in the time. So for me, backing into the spot, I just did it this morning. I came back from walking the dogs, and I almost pulled into the driveway because the driveway was empty. So normally I park to the side of the house, and the driveway has a whole bunch of cars in it, but everyone was gone, and the driveway was empty. I was going to drive the truck later on in the day before anyone even got home. And I thought to myself, I should just pull into the driveway. That way I can just pull right in. And I thought to myself, no, I will defer the gratification. And I made myself back in, because it's that important, it's that kind of recognizing that it's not about the particular moment and the efficiency you might gain in the moment. It's about the habit and about the sort of brain pattern that you're making in yourself at that moment that matters. So that's what I want you guys to get with this carving every day. I want you to establish that pattern. And guess what? Next week, you're still going to be carving every day, which is great, because studies have found that it takes, 2.5 weeks for a habit, a new pattern, a new something to become a habit. And so the goal is, by the time you're done with this challenge, that you will just have the habit of carving every day. And whether you actually want to, make a living from it or not, I believe it will have ramifications in your life, regardless of what your goals are, because that kind of habit and discipline is just good for you. So I hope to make sure that this is, valuable to you, even if it's not your goal to sort of reverse engineer what I'm doing. And if it is your goal to reverse engineer what I'm doing, great, because I'm also, like everything's basically geared towards that. I'm trying to just give you guys everything I can articulate that has worked for me, and give you a much more streamlined process than I sort of stumbled upon for myself. All the things that we're going to talk about are things that I have done, but rarely did I sort of approach them in a logical order. And it was only after the fact that I was able to see, clearly this should come next, and this is the sort of like, you should think about this and all that. Usually I would sort of stumble forward and realize halfway into something, oh shoot, I should have been thinking about this other thing. Okay, let's go try and do that. Or I would know that I should be doing something and resist for the longest time, really to no purpose. And so, this is me trying to push you guys so that you don't have to make all the mistakes that I made. One of the things that's tricky about these oval shapes is, and you'll see when I cut the rims, is that they're so wide that by the time I get to this end of the pivot cut, you can see I'm actually right at the tip of this knife. So this size shape really has more to do with, it's sort of calibrated to the length of this knife that I use than anything else. So let's see, is there anything more to talk about when it comes to carving every single day? I mean, I will say that carving every single day, carving is kind of like, I have a musician friend who described to me playing the violin or fiddle as being very unforgiving, in that if she fell off the bandwagon and didn't play it for a couple days, that she felt like she lost the really fine intuitive sense that you need with a fiddle. Now I'm sure this is sort of different for everyone, and really depends on the level that you've achieved before you stop, right? Obviously, the more you have something deeply ingrained in yourself, the more you retain, even if you sort of fall off the bandwagon. But I do think carving is that same way in that it's very intuitive. Carving every day. What's my ratio of axe time to knife time? So let me finish my thought and I'll answer your question, Brian. So I do think that carving every day, carving is so intuitive that by carving every day, you do reach sort of levels where you aren't thinking about things that otherwise you would have to be thinking about, and that is a real advantage. So my ratio of axe time to knife time is really skewed. I think in part because I do so many blanks for other people that I really have the axing part down in a way that, even though I'm good at carving, I don't do it at quite the same level as I do the axing. So the axing is, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes if I put something on the mule and refine the handle the way I did it with this one. And then, I don't know, depending on the size of the spoon and how much hollowing needs to happen, 20 to 60 minutes, depending on the shape and whether it's, whether the wood is being sweetly behaved or not. It can really differ. So, yeah, here we go. One of the things that I've become aware of is that is how much, and this is really, I've become aware of it from being around Dano and the conversations we've had about my process, is how much of my process is unique to me. And I think that's because I never took lessons. In part because I didn't have the money to take lessons, and in part because I had the mindset of, oh, I'll just figure this out on my own. And I do think that it's worth spending the time to take lessons. But that wasn't the place I was in 5 years ago. I do think that, a good teacher can really accelerate your growth. That's not to say all teachers can, but I think there's this interesting thing that happened, which is because I sort of learned a bunch from reading and then did a lot of my learning from just trying things and didn't have one particular way. Didn't have a particular way that I was doing something that I'd been taught by somebody else. I kind of invented a lot of stuff. And it's not to pat myself on the back. That's to say that I think that there's like this whole unexplored thing that there's all this unexplored potential is what I'm trying to say. Where, you don't have to master the way someone else did it in order to have a meaningful contribution. You just need to think critically about the process that you're actually using to do what you're doing. And a lot of times you can come up with really good reasons why you should do things differently than how a lot of the status quo is doing them. And that is super valuable. And if there's one thing I wish, it's that as a culture, as a community, that we encourage more of that in each other, to do more of these sort of innovative things where instead of just sort of seeing what somebody did and doing it, there's nothing wrong with seeing a great shape and doing a great shape, but I just think that there's so much untapped potential of different ways that you could do things. And whenever I see someone carving, like it's like that thrill you get when you watch some great YouTube video of some guy in Korea, um, uh, some guy in Korea who's using an adze and holding it with his foot, and you think, oh my God, like the top of your head explodes, and you think, wow, like there's so many different ways to do this, and I'm, just aware of this one way. And it's not that the one way that you're doing is so much better than any other way. It's just like that's the way that sort of been propagated for a whole bunch of reasons, historical reasons, cultural reasons, personality reasons, and I just think there's a lot more potential out there than we realize. Okay, now I've got the handle sweetened up. Got a little bit of a tail flip in here. The idea is that it's going to be held like that. So a ladle is kind of different from a cooking spoon. You don't hold a ladle like this. You hold a ladle like this. So having a tail flip at the end is nice. And so let me get back to the topic of carving every day. For me, what it's going to look like to carve every day is probably going to be that I'm going to get up early in the morning, because I don't want to carve at night. It's hard for me to carve in the evening. I find that I go to bed and my hands swell up and get really painful. And now the problem with carving during first thing in the morning, is that I can't go outside in the dark and axe out a blank. So it requires even more discipline, in that it requires me to be really thoughtful and proactive about making sure that I have tomorrow's blank lined up, ready to go, waiting down in the kitchen, so that I can get up at 5:30 in the morning and get carving. Now, I don't have to. I could take a break from carving for this busy time and tell myself all sorts of very valid, reasonable reasons why I should just take a break from carving and focus on other things. And for some people that might be the way to go, but I also feel like it's like if I'm not pushing ahead towards my goals, then I'm probably moving backwards. It's not something I tell myself to be it's not something that I tell myself to be fearful of taking a break. I don't have a problem taking a break. It's more something I tell myself to help motivate me to do the hard thing, to get up at 5:30 in the morning and carve every morning. Right, so it's not coming from a place of sort of, FOMO, fear of missing out, of sort of worrying that what I've achieved is going to dwindle and go away if I don't do something about it. Like that is true. That will happen. But it's more coming from a place of, well, think about what could happen if I push through this, even as I'm also pursuing this other thing really aggressively, right? That all of a sudden I'll end up in January in a place that I couldn't have imagined now. And that's been true all along. I feel like at every step of the way here, I've had an idea, thought, oh, I should do that, but later, when I have more time, when I'm out of this busy spell, later. And usually I think about it and then I think, let's just do it now anyways. And I think that's how real growth happens, is from layering more stuff on yourself than you thought you could handle. And that in that layering, in that drive, you end up doing more stuff than you would have thought possible. Because you never know what's gonna work out, right? You never know if this spoon carving is gonna work out. Is it the business you build, helping people develop their own brands and websites, is gonna work out? Is it the fact that you become a market manager for a right, and later equals regret for not doing now? And thanks, Joe. is it the fact that you became a market manager at a market that you would never have become a market manager at if you hadn't pushed yourself to do it, right? Like, you just don't know what opportunity is going to come your way. But I guarantee you it's not going to happen if you don't, pursue the things that you see being pursued. I also think that our community of spoon carvers, just by the very fact that it's a subtractive craft, tends to attract a fair number of people who would consider themselves perfectionists. And I think perfection is the enemy of all of that stuff. I think, rarely does perfection matter. And it basically never matters at the beginning of something. I think the only place that perfection matters is when you have achieved it, and then it is acknowledged as being awesome. But that doesn't mean that you will fail if you don't have it right at the beginning. And in fact, you're much more likely to fail from convincing yourself never to start in the first place. That's guaranteed to fail. And again, basically nobody's watching you. So just start whatever it is that you want to start. Okay, now I've trimmed the bowl to my satisfaction. I'm going to do the facets. And I've got a fair amount of sort of grain tear out on the back here, so I'm going to keep it real loose so that I can clean that up and get as smooth a feel as I can. I'm not really trying to push these facets one way or the other. Just trying to create a basic sort of oval shape with as clean a surface as I can. So, I think that's all I have in me right now as far as a rant about carving every day goes. Are there things that you guys want to know about the apprenticeship challenge? I mean, I'm making it up as I go along here, but are there things that you want to see if your sense of how it's going to go is or matches the reality of my sense of how it's going to go, or things like that? What do you guys want to know? I think it's a great one. Wayne Gretzky, miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Yeah, exactly. That's so true. And I mean, I am not a perfectionist, in case you couldn't tell, but I am maybe not as prone, but certainly prone to that kind of thinking, to that kind of feeling like, to feeling like I don't know enough and I should put it off until I have a chance to do some research, or I'm scared of what if I screw it up, or any number of things, right? And I've pushed through enough things to be able to at least recognize that that's not true, and to sort of call myself a little more on the carpet about it. Yeah, but I also recognize that I might very well have not developed that sense. There's nothing, guaranteeing that you develop that kind of sense of these things. So, let's see here. Ooh, okay. I'm going to push people to carve a different type of spoon. Whatever your name is. What's your name, man? What's your first name again? You've told me before, but I've forgotten at this point. I'm sorry. You guys are gonna get to watch me actually take a photograph. This is so meta. All right, kind of a dark day, so we'll see how it works. I have this kind of self-imposed deadline of, or let's see, exit, oh, menu to exit app, exit application. That's right. I just want to take a picture. So, Corey, yeah, Corey. I am not going to give you specific assignments along those lines, Corey. But I strongly encourage you, if you have that desire, to try and carve. It's not quite. There we go. Ha 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 ha. That's the focus I want. Let's see if I pulled that off. Not quite. Oh, that's because my too far open here. So I am not, and that's going to be because the focus of the project is on getting you to do sort of much more macro level stuff. Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, okay, good. You'll notice that I only took 2 photos there. That's, to my mind, a really important thing for my own sanity. If I take a million photos, it gets real hard to, and I feel like I spend all my time sifting through the photos instead of actually doing the work. The field is a bitch, yeah, especially when I want to focus on something that's a half an inch different from what it is. So, but I think I got a good photo out of it. You'll see when I post it later. Matt, by the way, man, I've been loving this camera. Thank you so much for selling it to me. I feel like it's really helped bump my game up to a whole different level. I'm still answering Corey's question. So to answer your question, no, because what I'm pushing is more the macro stuff. It's the habits. It's the sort of what comes next. What big thing should you be doing even as you push yourself to carve different types of spoons, right? Like, I think it's totally great. You've got marching orders to carve something each week. So maybe for you, Corey, if you need me to say, hey, Corey, carve a different thing each day of the week, I think that would be good. For someone else who wants to explore, something more about consistency, I might say, hey, Mary, I want you to carve the exact same thing every single day this week and see how that goes, right? Both of those paths will lead somewhere useful. But the purpose of the apprenticeship is not to make you better carvers, although if you carve every day, you will be a better carver. And it's not really to teach you how to carve spoons, although, again, that will happen. And there's plenty of information out there that you can digest and ingest to help you become that. The purpose, as I see it, of the apprenticeship is to push you to take the steps that I wish someone had pushed me to take. But instead I had to kind of dither and hem and haw about it and sort of gradually, tentatively take the step and worry all the time that it was the wrong one and not have a sense of, what should I do and who can I talk to about these things. So the idea with the apprenticeship is that it's about those bigger things. It's about the things that, quite frankly, for me, were harder than learning how to carve a spoon, right? Like, carving a spoon is pretty straightforward, and I know how to go about finding the information I need. Figuring out, how to amass a following on Instagram, way harder. And I didn't really have anyone I could ask about it, and nobody had really written meaningfully about it. I mean, certainly there were articles if you just Googled that, but you didn't trust that somebody really understood your situation. And I wasn't ever in a position to ask really specific questions. So the goal is to provide that opportunity for you guys that I wish I had been able to find for myself. Does that answer your question, Corey? Will I cover taking quality photos? Yes, that's going to be covered in next week's challenge. Yep, that's definitely a big part of it, and we will I will be writing a bunch about that in my blog post next week, and giving you guys some sort of information that I'll have. The hope is that then you take that and run with it and really improve your game from there. So, but this week, Ed, I want you to, I just want you to lock in the habit of carving every day. I think, part of why I layer this up week after week is that if I could give you all the information at once, this is all going to be, or not in this format, but it all could be in a book. A lot of this information is going to be in my book that I'm going to be published coming out next June. But it's, the problem with the book is you read the whole thing in one go. It's both a problem and a good thing. You read the whole thing in one go, and you get inspired, and then you bite off more than you can chew, and you don't instill the actual habits that are going to lead to the success, because you try and instill all the habits at once, and then you get overwhelmed, and then you fall off the bandwagon. So my goal with doing this week by week is to sort of give you the habits one at a time, layer them up so that you're never feeling overwhelmed. And by the end, you'll be amazed at where you end up. Does that make sense? Okay, so now I've done all the handle facets, end facets, the whole 9 yards. I've pulled the rim up real nice and snug on the backside here. All that's left is to hollow out the bowl. Yeah, it looks like I'm running over time. It's useful to use a clock when you're carving, just to kind of keep yourself honest about how much time it's actually taking you. And here I've been dithering about a little more than I should have been. I'm going to end up clocking in here at about maybe 70 minutes, maybe 75 minutes. Either way, it's fine, but it's nice to sort of have a goal to push for. Get my book on Audible. One thing I hadn't considered, we'll see how this goes. If you guys actually find this content valuable, maybe I'll consider making it some sort of, some sort of written form that you could sort of get all at once and then use as a reminder to go back to. But we'll have to see. I'm not gonna put that cart before the horse. The main thing for me is that this is a learning experience for me as well, in that I'm sort of new to giving you guys this apprenticeship experience. It's quite different from teaching a spoon carving class. It's a whole different thing, and the topics are different, and what I have to share is different, and how to present it, and the order, and the sort of the intensity is different, and I'm figuring out my cadence during this. So it's very much a learning experience for me as well. You can see I'm really pushing to hollow out this bowl quite roughly. Right, because the thing is, I could teach you how to carve spoons exactly like me, and I think that would be a smart move. Guess what? You'd probably end up carving spoons that looked a lot like me, not because there's anything, just because my spoons are a product of the process that I use. And whenever I see somebody who carves spoons that look very similar to mine, I don't think, God, they're copying me. I think, yep, we use exactly the same process. I can see where that came from. Ed, I'll answer your question in a second. So, but there are lots of great ways to carve spoons. And so, if you want to learn exactly how I do things, all that information is out there. But you don't need to carve spoons exactly the way I carve them to find it useful to educate yourself on how to sort of take your carving to the next level. And even if you don't want your carving even if you don't foresee yourself having a career carving and selling spoons, even if you're very much in the camp of, I do this for my mental health, I don't want to sell, it's just, as soon as I sell, it becomes stressful. Even if that's you, I would say it's still worth doing this because of the framework that it will set up and how it will just give you options in life. That it's not about sort of having, if you're ambitious like me and you want to, make this what you do and you want to make a name for yourself, great, this will work. If all you want is to like sort of solidify your commitment to carving, and sort of have someone give you a push that will keep you carving more regularly, this will work also. If all you want is you don't know what you want, but you like carving spoons, great. Like it's just about having the options later on down the road, because there's one thing I can guarantee is that you don't know what you're going to want or need later on. Maybe God forbid you get laid off and all of a sudden you realize that if you could just ramp up your spoon carving a little bit, that you could cover, 50% of what you used to make, or 25% or whatever. And that means that you can then afford to take the job that you do want to take instead of really hustling to try and find the job that would sort of salvage the situation. Right? There's lots of different things that happen and you just don't know. And so for me, it's just smart to set yourself up so that you have as much control over a situation and as many options going forward as you can. And that's all I'm really showing you is the tools that I've used to set that up for myself. We're talking about it in the context of spoon carving, but it could be anything. It could be a farm. It could be a business that has nothing to do with a craft. It could be really anything. All right, let me go to the topic that Ed just asked about batching. What do I think about batching? I think let me see, how harsh do I want to be? I think batching is a bunch of baloney. Let's just start there. I think that each piece of wood is so unique and different that the thing that matters is your deep understanding of, in this particular spot, this spoon has that problem. I think batching needs to be considered as a separate thing from trying to carve consistent forms consistently, because that, I think, is really worth doing. But I am not a fan of trying to do them in a batch format, because I feel like by concentrating on the knife cut that you're trying to make and thinking that you're just going to perform that same cut over and over again, you are not respecting the fact that this is not a robotic process with consistent materials. The material itself is inconsistent. And really, you as a craftsman, what you need to develop is a deep appreciation for and understanding of how those materials vary and how you respond to that variation. And I honestly don't think that batching helps you do either of those things. So I think it's become very cool to talk about batching and think of that as being a way to drive productivity. And while I do think that you can maybe gain some efficiency by batching, I don't think it's nearly as much as people imply, and or I think you lose something in the sense of both the quality of what you're producing and also the sort of state of flow that you can achieve. Because the state of flow gets achieved when you are deeply immersed in the thing that you're doing, right? And while assembly lines have been shown to improve efficiency of something, they have been also found to decrease the happiness that someone has in a task, in a job, in the sense of satisfaction with their life, and also their sense of ownership over the job, and also their sense of mastery over the entire process. And let's assume that those last two we can even put aside because you're going to do the entire process, whether you batch it or not. But I do think that it has sort of ramifications of how you think about the object. So I don't like batching at all, and I never do it. I did a bunch of experimenting with it last year, the year before, came to these realizations I just articulated and stopped. So Do I retain the right to change my mind in a year or two when I try it again and realize, oh shoot, I was wrong? Absolutely. But that's how I feel right now. All right, so now I'm fussing more than I should. It's easy, something like a spoon, to fuss and fuss and fuss and fuss and fuss. And while sometimes that fussing is useful and really makes a huge difference in how graceful the finished thing can be, it's also not particularly useful. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to say, which is, I mentioned this in my blog, but I also want to mention it here for those of you who are going to watch it all the way to this point and are taking part in the challenge, is when you carve every day, I want you to push yourself. You're not necessarily going to achieve this. I want you to push yourself to carve a completed thing each day. So if you can do that in an hour, great. If you need an hour and a half, do it. If you say, I need 2.5 hours, and I'm not going to do 2.5 hours every day, so I'm going to do everything every other day, I would say, if you always give yourself 2.5 hours to carve a spoon, you're always going to need 2.5 hours to carve a spoon. So if your goal is to become more efficient, and whether that's because you need to be more efficient in order to make the price point work that you can charge, or if it's just more efficient because you want to gain that mastery, push yourself to be faster. You learn a lot when you push yourself to be faster, and not just as a, like, I'm going to carve a 40-minute spoon and see what I need to do differently. Like, cover when to call it done. Yeah, for sure. So my goal would be, if I had to say, like, here's the perfect thing to do, I would say, like, give yourself an hour, do your utmost to carve a spoon an hour. And if you can't carve a spoon an hour because you just really don't have that kind of skill, then here's the thing to do. Set yourself up the day before by carving a blank, doing all the axe work, doing all that stuff where you have sort of the really big fails that set you back time-wise, right? Because I know how it works. You screw up, you didn't anticipate a crack, it shows up at the last minute, and there you go, you're out 20 minutes, and there goes your time frame, right? What I'm talking about is like an hour of carving. So set yourself up the day before by axing out a blank or two. Maybe you spend an hour one day and you make yourself 2, 3, 4 blanks. Then each of the subsequent days, and you store those in plastic in your freezer or in your fridge. Fridge should be fine. Each of those subsequent days, you pull one out and you carve it, and you go as fast as ever you can, being safe, and see what you can do in an hour. I think you'll be surprised if you have that mindset of, okay, I need to be efficient about this. And if you really read what I put out there about how to be efficient about this, I put out a lot of content. It's all the tricks I know about how to be efficient and how not to screw up at the last minute, and all this stuff is out there. It's known. Then I think you will be pretty surprised at what you can achieve in an hour. And at the end of a week carving for just an hour a day, I think you will be very impressed with what you were able to do that you hadn't thought of before. So it might be a smart move for you to sort of batch the axing out part of the process, not because there's anything to be gained in terms of efficiency, but simply because for a lot of you, sort of finding that time to use the axe when it's loud and it's daylight is tricky, and I get that. And so when you have that time, put aside an hour, do as many blanks as you can, bag them up, and that way, whatever mistakes you make that ruin blanks sort of partway through the process and you waste a bunch of time, it's all sort of contained within that 1 hour. That counts. And then the thing I would also say is avoid going back. This actually gets to your point, Ed. Really avoid going back to a spoon and trying to fix it the next day. There is nothing that is worth going back and trying to fix the next day. There's just nothing. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to sell it? You're going to not sell it. Are you actually going to learn something new from it? Or are you just going to be frustrated? Are you going to take something that was pretty good and ruin it because you went a little bit too far? Yep, that's definitely going to happen at some point. And